Okay, so I think we will get going. Welcome to this discussion or public lecture today on the subject of role of transparency and accountability in ethical governance. And for those of you who might be wondering why we are back here, we are still where we were from the beginning of this year. But we are so fond of the BTC that we have decided to come back here occasionally. And we couldn't choose a better guest than the distinguished Mr. Vinod Rai to mark our comeback to the BTC. I will have very few things to say about Mr. Rai because I think he has things to say which we are all looking forward to hearing. But I'll just share a couple of what I would say insights about him from a very peripheral perspective. Obviously, we all know that he has been a very distinguished civil servant. In fact, today, looking back at my own career in the civil service, I feel honored to think that I was a part of the same establishment in the Ministry of Finance at the time when he was also one of the very senior functionaries out there. But I think more than that, as a civil servant, I think what is very important to the entire public service community in India, a huge mammoth gargantuan community of 400,000 people, is the fact that Mr. Rai actually, in a sense, maybe not voluntarily, but nonetheless because of what he did, he in a sense became the conscience keeper of the nation. And that was when he was the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. To the extent that I think what has happened now is that the expectations from the civil service in India have really gone up phenomenally because of what he did in this last Avatar and the kind of standards that he set when it came to probity, accountability, and ethical governance will be very difficult to replicate. But I only hope that it sets in motion a process of change which was missing in India and which Mr. Rai could signal very appropriately and effectively. So what I'll now do is that I'll just leave you with the thought that he's going to say a few things from the book that he has just written and launched in India. Needless to say that this book has many accounts of what he brought to light in terms of the various irregularities and, put it in sort of popular terms, the scams and scandals that have affected public service delivery in India at various points in time. And knowing Mr. Rai, he will not shy from answering any questions that you raise. So you're most welcome to do so once he is done with his extracts. So sir, my great pleasure, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amtendu. Thank you very much. I don't know whom this thing listens to.
It's on.
You just
It's
have to be
on.
Yeah, no, it's on.
Yeah.
Seems so. Okay. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Let me make a confession first that it's not often that an auditor gets an audience. In fact, let alone see an auditor, I don't think any self-respecting audience wants to hear him. So if an auditor is getting an audience, I'm obviously going to enjoy it and I'm going to capitalize on it. And since I have a captive audience for the next 1 hour plus, I might as well make the best of it. Because I noticed that during the 5-6 years that I was the Auditor General, at a very rapidly accelerating rate, I was losing friends. And whatever little friends one has surviving, one must continue to cherish the friendship because they are probably the ones that feel that the right things have been said, the right actions have been taken, and whatever. Now, say as far as India is concerned, process of economic development for us is not really an option at all. It is a compulsion today. It's a compulsion today because there's far too much at stake and for far too many people, because the process of economic development is the only process by which we will be able to make these people a part of the development process, provide them employment opportunities, put purchasing power in their hands, and in some ways ensure that the standard of living of these people goes up. Because financially including them or making development financially inclusive is going to be the other challenge that we have. But economic development by itself is not going to be the panacea. Unless economic development, economic growth is nurtured, is incubated, and is protected by good governance, I don't think we will ever be able to draw upon the fruits of that economic growth. Large chunks of population will be able to draw upon that fruits of economic development. And we have explored over the last 3 to 4 years, 5 years maybe, about how good governance has been within the country to be able to draw upon these fruits and to be able to ensure that the benefits of economic development is available to large strata of society. Now, if you have to talk about good governance, if you have to talk about ethical models of governance, I think the two pillars on which these will have to be standing is some ways probity, integrity, transparency on the one hand, and accountability of the people in power, people in positions, people who are in a position to be able to call the shots or engage in governance as the other pillars. And that is why in India today, such transparency or accountability has more or less taken on iconic proportions. Everybody talks about it. Everybody desires to have it. But is it being put in place? Are there practitioners of the very issues that people have been talking of from platforms? That is the substance to which we need to, that's the substance that we need to address. And I think that is one of the issues which is going to be a cause for concern within the country, because centuries around the globe, countries have lost out, kingdoms have been lost, not because of external aggression or anything of that sort. It has been internal malfeasance. And unless we are able to safeguard against that, we are going to be getting into a problem situation. And why do I say that? I say that because it's government which takes money from the public at large and spends that money. So it's somebody else's money being spent for some other purpose. Government is only has the fiduciary responsibility between these class of people. To that extent, accountability, probity, transparency in government is far more important than in any corporate sector. And we have been advocating the thought that when you are in government, you almost sit as if you are sitting in a glass house. Every action of a government employee is under scrutiny. And unless we are in a position to be able to withstand that public scrutiny, we can't make a success out of the administrative mechanism that we promulgate or we practice or we implement. And that is what transparency is all about. In fact, the government itself was so keen on introducing transparency that it was in 2006 that we passed the Right to Information Act, which has been implemented and which has been a great success in a large number of ways. In fact, the state of Rajasthan implemented this act in the year 2000 itself. They promulgated the act. It was much later that it was brought by the central government. And not only the act, but there have been institutions of horizontal accountability, which the government has set in place. Maybe the Vigilance Commission, be the Election Commission, the Information Commission, or the Auditor General's Office, all of these, to a large extent, are seeing empowerment in a large number of ways. And this empowerment is coming to bear upon public at large, government certainly, and has become a topic of public debate today. In India, in the last 4 or 5 years, citizen has come center stage. The citizenry is wanting to participate in democracy, participate in governance, and is holding the government to account. I mean, the simple example is 2012. Maybe the flashpoint was an unfortunate event which happened with a lady in December 2012, but that was a time when youngsters, purely on the strength of social media, descended upon the streets of India Gate, or Jantar Mantar as it is popularly known in Delhi, not to protest anything, merely to express concern about the situation as it was obtaining in society in India. They were just lighting candles, they were sitting together and discussing issues. And unfortunately, why I involve government in this is because civil servants like me have been trained to handle political rallies, law and order situations. But I think the administration just did not understand how to deal with these youngsters who had come out. I mean, I think what's happening in Hong Kong is kind of an example of it. And I suffered because on that particular day I happened to be in Hong Kong. And neither could I get to my hotel in time, nor could I get to my meeting place in time. But that was the kind of a situation. And why I say the administration didn't know how to handle them was, in the month of December, on 23rd December, December in Delhi is fairly cold, we water cannoned the students in wanting to disperse. That's the most unfortunate thing that could have happened. Administration could have handled it in 100 different ways, much better ways. But this is the way we reacted, and this is what happened anyway. So I was more on empowerment of the institutions of horizontal accountability. But more importantly, the institutions of vertical accountability, which is the media and the citizen at large. They are the ones who are really expressing concern about governance, or the strength of governance, or the issues concerning governance within the country today. And it's a very good thing that has happened, because it has brought government's performance to center stage. Probably the last general election was the first general election in the country which started with development being an issue of debate. Of course, towards the end it did degenerate into social issues which India has not been able to overcome as yet. But it did start with governance as an issue, economic development as an issue, which I thought was, for India, was a very good thing. And why I call it ethical governance is because I'll give you a couple of examples. India introduced what is known as the Lok Ayukt, or the ombudsman in the states. In the center, it has not been introduced as yet. And dependent upon the decision of a Lok Ayukt in the state of Karnataka, one chief minister had to step down. Now, it's a good thing that happened, because not many chief ministers were willing to step down, despite the fact that some kind of a public anger, public discourse was against him in large number of ways. But when he stepped down, his party president, who happened to be in that state capital that day, from a public platform, podium, said that, look, what the chief minister had done was certainly not illegal, though it may have been unethical. Any day, any one of us citizens of the country would have rather had it the other way around. I wouldn't want, maybe a chief minister or a person in power does commit something unknowingly as illegal, but certainly we wouldn't want him to be unethical in any way. But more importantly, there was another cabinet minister who was speaking at another public discourse says, we've heard of revenue deficits, fiscal deficits, current account deficit, etc., etc. But today what this country is suffering from is a deficit of ethics. That is a very sad commentary upon the situation as it was obtaining. And not only that, quite often in public discourse you will hear that some act of commission, some act of malfeasance, some act of irregularity has occurred, and somebody big, some political being will come onto center stage and say, don't worry, the law will take its own course. Unfortunately, what was happening was that was the exact thing which was becoming a casualty. The law was not being allowed to take its own course. The delays that were being put in place were so unfortunate that the law was not really taking its own place. That was the kind of milieu in which the Auditor General, like anybody else, was functioning. We were facing these kind of situations on government paper, government files, government actions, and coming up with all kinds of startling bits of information to ourselves itself. How do you deal with this? We looked around the rest of the world and we looked at similar models in other countries, and I'll give you only one example. This was the US. Auditors General are available in all the countries, you're all aware. 191 countries constitute what's known as the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. The US, as we have the CAG in India, the Controller and Auditor General, the US calls the institution the GAO. The acronym is GAO. In 2004, this office, which was known as a Government Accounting Office, in 2004. In 2004, the 110th Congress repositioned the office of GAO and called it the Government Accountability Organization. That gives it an entirely different focus to what it was. From a government accounting office becomes an accountability organization, which means it was to hold the government financially accountable to the legislature. And this has been the trend in countries around the globe. Now, that is where India was placed, and we asked ourselves, what is our mandate? Is our mandate merely to conduct an audit, prepare an audit report, and as the Constitution says, plug it into Parliament and full stop? That's all? Because once it's gone into Parliament, of course it's coming to public domain, that's a different issue. But what happens after that report has gone to Parliament? The unfortunate practice was that these reports get automatically referred to the Public Accounts Committee, but we put in about 150 reports into Parliament every year. Public Accounts Committee, if it has to meet very often, it meets about 25 times in a year. How many of these reports can they actually discuss? And obviously, then take remedial action on those reports. It was not coming to anything. That's the time when we thought we will rethink our mandate. Whether it is merely to, does our role finish once the report is gone through? When we felt that around the globe what was happening was that our mandate was also to sensitize public opinion on what these audit findings were. Especially so in social sector issues. Social sector issues of the kind that, public health, rural employment, water, pollution, sanitation, waste disposal, etc. Where, other than say maybe defense, atomic energy or space, etc., which are issues which the normal public is slightly removed from, distanced from. These are issues which are closer to the common man. He needs to know what our audit reports are saying about government spending on these sectors. And that's why we started putting out what we commonly refer to as Noddy books. You've heard of the Enid Blyton character Noddy. And you guys may not have read Noddy books. Noddy is a character by Ian Brighton for younger, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, maybe 10-year-olds at the most, or less than that certainly. Where the books are small in size. I haven't brought them along, very small in size. At the most, the Noddy books were only 10 pages. Our Noddy books were, the original Noddies I should say, were only 10 pages. Our Noddy books were about 18 to 20 pages, where the gist of any audit finding was given. The details, the technicalities were left out, but what were the audit findings were given, and we started putting out these Noddy books into public space, public media, sensitizing public opinion, journalists, college-going students, citizens groups, NGOs, people like that, where people needed to debate, why shouldn't I know that the monies which are being taken out of my pocket, and there's an element of compulsion in it. Tax is a compulsion. Money which are being taken out and ostensibly being spent on, say, rural employment. How effective is the spending of that? And that's how we put out the Noddy books. To good use, but of course we got questioned on whether that was our mandate to be doing that or not. We decided that, look, nobody is going to empower us, we empower ourselves. That is our mandate, nobody can question us, and we got into public space spend. But that was not the end. We did indulge in what was also known as social audit, in the sense that if we were doing audit on, say, drinking water, maybe our core competence, incidentally, just by training, I'm not an auditor, but core competence may have been audit, but we do not have local knowledge about what we were going to be auditing, the area where we were going to be auditing. So we thought that if there are credible citizens groups working in that area, we'll probably, the last mile, we'll tie up with them, and then get into the realm of what is social audit, so that number one, we get that last mile coverage. Number two, they get a credible voice through our audit reports into their legislature or to parliament, whatever it may be. And that's the kind of social audit that we did. But ultimately, anyway, all that was behind us. After I retired, after 6 years of very eventful existence in the office of the Auditor General, I thought my so-called CAG years were behind me. This is a chapter which I wanted to close and get on, because I think I had written more than I could chew. Media space was chasing me in large number of ways. I wanted to close that chapter. I had no intention of writing at least a book about what we had done and what was this all about. It was only 6 to 8 months later, when innuendos did not stop coming into media space or public space about what the Auditor General should be doing and should not be doing. When colleagues and friends approached me and said, look, this is going to have very far-reaching consequences on the institution of the Auditor General, because somebody might try to, efforts have been made to bully the institution into some kind of, call it silence, or some kind of making it more toothless, or whatever it may be. That's when I decided to write the book. And it didn't take me long to write it, because it's based on 5 case studies that I picked out. Case studies which are not picked out only because they have been sensational. They have come into media space in a large number of ways, but where I'm pointing out 5 different levels of failures in governance which are coming up. One could be like a total lack of leadership. One could be a total lack of, transparency, in the sense that all decisions were taken in a realm of opacity, where they felt that these decisions will never be questioned. One was the total lack of cohesion in conduct of a particular event. What I picked out is the Commonwealth Games of 2012. Commonwealth Games of 2012. And what came about, in a minute, you have 19 agencies doing 23 different venues or infrastructure events, and there is no umbrella organization, overarching organization which is sitting on top, bringing about the coordination of these. The entire situation was crying out for a leader to emerge and take up, leadership, and then bring about an element of coordination between the agencies to ensure that it's a cohesive whole that we finally deliver. We did deliver games, fairly good games, good medal haul, but the kind of publicity, adverse publicity we got for the planning of those games was horrendous, absolutely tragic. So that's the kind of things. The idea was not to buttonhole anything. In fact, I've written the book in the preface itself. Well, something, something, something. It says, hence I present to you this book. It is not about creating a sensation or revealing mysteries. It is not about running down anyone or deriding the administration. It is not about finding fault and paraphrasing audit reports of the Comptroller and Auditor General. This book is about accountability. It is about transparency. It is about that vital quality in society of which we seem to have created a huge deficit. It is about ethics. It is about how a nation which prides itself on the greatness of Ashoka, some of you may be familiar, the nobility of Akbar and the compassion of Buddha and the courage of Gandhi seems to have lost its moorings. It is about how we are now mired in a whirlpool of decadence and malevolence in society. And, the idea being that the failings of these 4 or 5 cases, I haven't called them cases. I think the journalist in my publisher overtook everything else, and he's not called it cases, he's called them follies, follies of government. I tried to argue with her, saying that please don't do that. And she said no. I think they wanted the saleability of the book to go up, probably, by instead of case studies calling them follies. But anyway, basically, some of you must have heard about what the report on what is popularly known as 2G in India, spectrum, where we put out a humongous figure as a figure of loss which has occurred to the Treasury. That humongous figure, though I have been able to successfully defend that figure in the Public Accounts Committee and the Joint Parliamentary Committee which was set up, nobody could fault. I mean, difference of opinion emerged, but we could successfully defend why we put out that figure. That figure was put out, and I'm saying it in a close to a forum, not because that was actually a loss incurred by government. But as I mentioned earlier, our appetite, the appetite of the general public in the country to accept corruption or malfeasance has become so huge that smaller figures than this were not in any way raising concern among the public. So this was a humongous figure which obviously got picked up by media which is 24/7. They have to fill up space. They are most often than not, they are very on overdrive. They picked it up and of course put it out. It attracted attention. And what was this all about? This was all about a system which was designed to prevent exactly what happened and could not prevent it. Nothing which was being done was not in the knowledge of those who were in position to have stopped it, right from the Prime Minister downwards. But they could not stop it. Why? Because it was all sacrifice on the altar of what the government itself had said, on the altar of what is known as compulsion of coalition politics. Does it mean that the nation gets subjugated to keeping a coalition or a political party in power only? That any action that the government takes is for itself, but in the larger, not in the larger interest of the nation at large by itself. And that is what the entire 2G story is about. It's all in the book. I don't want to get into it in detail now in case there is a discussion. The other issue that we have brought about is the issue of what is known as the coal mines, where coal mines were being allotted for mining on a very opaque kind of a procedure. There was nothing transparent about the decisions that were being taken, in the sense that 17 people applied for, say, 3 mine blocks. All 17 of them made presentations. And all that the minutes of that meeting record is number 1 gets it, number 7 gets it, number 9 gets it. What are the merits of 1, 7 and 9? What are the demerits of 2, 3, 6 and 8 and 12 and 14, etc. is not recorded anywhere. It's just mentioned 1, 7 and 9 gets it. We question that. Why? Why not have? And that too, when way back in 2004, when it was pointed out to the Prime Minister, who happened to be holding charge of the coal portfolio at that time, that look, this is a procedure which is opaque, is not able to test the scrutiny, and we need to change it. And in all fairness to the Prime Minister, he understood what the problem was. And on 1st of November 2004 itself, he took a decision that yes, we must convert to auctions. Till today, that decision has not been operationalized. They had to go in for legislation, they had to go in for regulations and etc., etc. None of the mines have been operationalized. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court, like in the 2G case, that came down heavily, has cancelled all those licenses. Of course, there is another debate on whether that has it disrupted the economic progress of the country or otherwise. Similarly, there was a case of the Commonwealth Games, which I mentioned to you. There was of the production sharing contract, which is where PPPs are being encouraged and where a private operator is given a national resource, maybe water, maybe mines, maybe airspace, whatever it is, to exploit commercially, in which the revenues are shared between government and the private operator. That's what we call exploration of hydrocarbons, which the case that has been examined is the Krishna Godavari basin, where offshore drilling is done for gas exploration. And how every event manifested in the benefit going to the private operator and not accruing to government, where we questioned how each of the decisions in the revenue sharing business was again accruing to the operator. Why it came about is not because this was not an audit that we did on our own. We were invited by government, by the minister concerned, to do the audit, because there was far too much of concern in public media and in parliament about what is commonly known as gold plating, where the operator is incurring huge fixed costs up front. And all these costs, 90% of this cost was coming to government account. So the objections were that he was building up his infrastructure, which will benefit him 10 years later. And this entire infrastructure fixed costs were to government account. Whereas he would have no cost to incur, but in the long run would be developing the exploration sites commercially for his own benefit. And of course, the last case that we brought out is of the Civil Aviation Department, in which, on the one hand, avenues to fly for our national carrier, Air India, were being closed. Bilateral rights were being given out to other airlines to fly in the country, interior cities of the country, 14 of them. And here was Air India being asked to purchase more and more planes. And I don't know how many $1 billion it will translate into, 40,000 crores? 6-7 billion dollars were being spent for purchase of aircraft, 97% of which was on debt alone. There's no way in which you can make this commercially a profitable, viable proposition when it is 97% debt, but there was a conscious decision being taken. And this was a decision not being taken by the board of Air India, which would have been more savvy in terms of commercialism, professionalism, or technical aspects of it, but it was a decision being guided by government. That's what has been discussed in it. These are all reports which have been put out into Parliament. Did catch media attention for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, maybe 15 days, 2 weeks, but that's all. But nothing conclusive in terms of remedial measures were taken. So hopefully now there will has started a kind of a debate of various kinds today. So that's what transparency and ethical governance in India we are trying to, some of us are in the business of trying to propagate, trying to project and ensure, if not in government, it gets into the mind of the public at large, and most of people start looking at their government from the standpoint, from the viewpoint of, is the government promoting sustainable development on an edifice which can in some ways be called ethical. I think I should stop with that for the time being, and if there is something that you wish to ask, I'll be very privileged to answer any of those issues.